Oh my god. Jesus. I, wow. Um, Shit. Okay, it is the end of 2020, and I have read more this year than I have in many, many years. So I'm gonna quickly go through everything that I've read this year, and I think it'd be fun. I've seen a lot of videos that do this sort of thing, and I always thought they were interesting. So I'm gonna do it and try not to drop these books while I do that. First thing I read this year was this one right here. This is Spring Snow by Yukio Mishima. It is a book that has a lot of moral quandaries in it. It's a book about ethics. It's a book about this relationship that goes really, really abusive, and it's utterly intriguing. It's funny that this is the first book I'm talking about because this is also a book that I did not finish. I got over to the halfway point, and a lot of the reason why I didn't finish this book is not because of what it's about, and it's not about the morals and the ethics that are involved with it. It's a book that's just really filled with a lot of really awful characters that are not fun to read. I love the idea of a lot of the things that are talked about in this book, but reading it was horrible for me. And I don't know if I'll ever finish reading it. This book is set in early 1900s Tokyo, so it's a really beautiful book when it comes to the environments that are mentioned. Mishima does a really good job of kind of giving you a sense of the familial ties that all the characters have. It's just not really a book for me. I don't see myself ever really finishing this book, but we'll see. But definitely nowhere in the future am I going to revisit this one. Well, actually, at the beginning of the year, I thought it would be fun to read one of the series that I had mentioned reading for years and years and years. And even though, despite my older sibling buying me the books as they came out and I said I read them, I didn't. I'm talking about the Harry Potter series. I read the first two books and then I kind of stopped halfway through the third book, which we'll get into in a second. But as far as what I have read, they are, as you would assume, really good. J.K. Rowling's not the greatest author when it comes to a lot of things, but she's very good at being decent at most things. She sets this really interesting world with these really, really good characters. The stories and the plots are pretty airtight. Where she kind of falls off for me a little bit in her writing style is she's not very descriptive when it comes to explaining how things look. Some things she's okay with, and some things she really lets your imagination kind of fill in the blanks, and that's great for a lot of people, but I'm more of a fantasy reader, so I kind of like being told the way that a lot of things look. But, you know, these books really are the reason why teen fiction and YA fiction are kind of really popular. Like I said, I did stop halfway through the third book when the author of them decided to be the worst. So yeah, hopefully one day I get back to finishing them because I was really enjoying them. But as for right now, with current events, I cannot see myself pushing through with that. I will say one thing that is super interesting and that a lot of people do point out is kind of how much she ages up each book as they were released. They age them up as, and kids grow up in school and that sort of stuff. And you can really see it. I don't know why I picked this one, because really the first book is really good, and then this book is just like not nearly as good as the first book. It's still fine, but what I've read through Prisoner of Azkaban, I'm really, really enjoying, and it's kind of sucky that I just kind of put down the third book. I want to get back to it one day, but we'll see. It's always hard for me to kind of separate art from artist, especially when they're concurrently and vehemently doing things that aren't cool. So we'll see. One day, hopefully. I don't know. One of the books that people have told me to read years and years and multiple suggestions over and over again, and talking about Dune. Dune is fantastic. It's a book that it's quite long-winded sometimes. Uh, and Dune is very much not about the main story that is presented. It's more about the themes that Frank Herbert wants to discuss. If you know anything about this book, it's kind of like the Lord of the Rings, like what the Lord of the Rings is for fantasy, Dune is for modern sci-fi. And I kind of feel that. There certainly are some things about Herbert's writing style that I dislike. He's not very good at writing action, but he does a serviceable job. There's really no faults to this book, except the ending of it really ends quickly. And from what I've been told, the second book in this, The Dune Messiah, it pretty much ends the first story and probably should have been a part of this because the ending does kind of bring it down a little bit for me, but you know, it's Dune. It's one of the greats. So finally read that one, liked it a lot. If you watch a lot of these type of videos, these booktuber videos, this is a book that gets recommended a lot, I feel like, and for good reason. And I'm talking about The Lies of Locke Lamora. Really, for a book that is about, what is it, about 700-ish pages, it probably is the quickest I've burned through a book that is that long. I'm not going to talk too much about it because there are a ton of other people who have talked about this book, but if you're looking for a kind of alternative fantasy that has a lot of heist elements and it's just a really fun read with probably some of the best character work I've read in a fantasy book, check this out. It's pretty cheap. You can get it for like $9. Go pick it up at a bookstore. Don't buy off of Amazon, please. There was a moment early on in this book where I thought an event was happening and it meant horrible things for the main cast. But then the way that it resolved in the next 2 pages utterly sunk me into this book, and I couldn't put it down. I don't think there's a character in here that was underwritten. It's kind of amazing. I really look forward to reading the next 2 that are out, and hopefully more of them as they come out. I do wish it was more popular than it is. But that being said, there's always kind of like that little thing with like having like a little cult community, and I feel like that's what this book has. So yeah. Up next is a book that I've had my eye on for a while. It's a series that's getting a lot of attention lately. And it actually just ended this year with the trilogy. I read the first book of the Poppy War trilogy, and it was really good. I would say the first quarter of this book is a bit slow. R.F. Kuang does a great job of kind of letting you sit in the world for a little while. But once things start going in this book and the plot really kind of kicks off, because, you know, it's a book called The Poppy War, so obviously a war is going to happen. The moment that it starts is the moment that this book goes from being kind of slow to like full throttle, and it doesn't really stop until the end. I found it really intriguing. Her magic system in this book is interesting. I don't think I've read kind of a shamanistic take like this. And really, another interesting thing about it too is that her writing style is super accessible. I could easily see this book being like a YA book, and I'm really glad that it isn't, because she does touch on a lot of themes of like real war and kind of the cost of what war is for a lot of people. And I gotta give props to her for making a teenage female protagonist that doesn't suck. Rin is a character full of faults, and she is wholly herself. She doesn't feel like any other character that I've really read. And on the foundation that this book set, I'm really looking forward to reading the conclusion, because also I did end up picking up and reading The Dragon Republic later. And I would say out of these 2 books, I definitely liked the beginning of this one more, but really everything that made this book good shines through in this. It's just more of the same, and everything is dialed up to 11. The story's even better, the characters are even better. Yeah, if you want kind of like a grimdark fantasy that deals with a lot of real world, real war sort of situations, and it's based kind of in like a feudal Japan, China sort of thing, check them out. They're really good. And then I did take a little break in between reading the first and second Poppy War books. I did read Beartown by Frederick Bachman. I'm a little conflicted on this book. I think the story of it's really good, and I think the ideals are really good in this book. His writing style is very good. He's very, very good at writing these really small characters that feel real. There's not a character in this book that I can't say that I've ever met a real person who doesn't embody the same thing that that these characters embody. It's kind of uncanny. I come from a small town, so it's really interesting how realistic some of this stuff is. Really, when it comes to the main crux of what happens in this book, it is super realistic how a lot of the characters handle the situation that's presented to them. And me coming from a small town, we didn't have anything like this happen, but we had some violent things happen. And it is realistic the way that some people will just deny what's happening because they like a certain person is kind of interesting. And that's what I found utterly compelling about this book, is just how good and how realistic everything was in this book. Now, I will say, one thing that is a really big detractor of this is that said thing doesn't happen until about page 200, and the book is about 400 pages long. There's a lot of rising action that happens, and for the first 150-ish pages, I kind of almost wanted to put the book down because there was not a lot that happened. That being said, there is always like a little sense of like you want to get used to the world, you want to live in it. But for this, it kind of went from being utterly compelling in the beginning to being like, are we going to do anything? I am looking forward to picking up more of this stuff, but it's just weird for me because when it got good, the last 200 pages of this book are fantastic. And there's a lot of really quotable lines in this book that I found really intriguing. He's very good at writing these little moral compass moments, if you will. And I really liked it. It's just, I just really wish that first half of this book was as good as the second half of this book. And then obviously the things that I'm reading currently. I am starting with one of the premier series in modern fantasy, The Way of Kings right now. I am about page, 650-ish, somewhere around there? Yeah, about 650-ish. And I'm really loving it. I'm really loving it. It's really interesting. He's very good at world building. But I will say, for a book that is about, over 1,000 pages, there isn't like an overarching plot that's happening. So it's really cool that I want to keep reading more of it, even though there really isn't something big that's happening all the time. I think that's a testament to how good his character work is and how great he is at writing characters. Now, that being said, I will say at times certain characters aren't nearly as compelling as other ones are. In the beginning, I didn't really care for the character of Shallan, and now I'm really, really liking hers. Whereas like the character of Kaladin is like fantastic all the way through. Weird things like that. Obviously, I haven't finished it yet, so I'm just really looking forward to reading more of it, and I will probably take a little bit of time off between reading this one and reading the next book because it's a lot. I feel like what I've read so far in this book, a lot of what I've read so far in this book is kind of like the first Game of Thrones book where you get these little bits and pieces and you don't really know where they fit, and you get like these little world building things that kind of come back around and kind of explode later on. And I am getting a lot of the feeling of this. I will say the setting and the world in this book is really, really intriguing to me. And the way it starts is super compelling. Yeah, if you want like a super big, epic, modern fantasy thing that is still going on, check that out because it's super good. Well, yeah, there's that. I hope this was fun to watch. I always love talking about the books that I've read. So, what have you read? Pop it in the comments, all that sort of stuff. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.